You always said that I was selfish, always thinking about myself, always wanted more than most men. I never thought of someone else. Said I never said I'm sorry, even though I was wrong. You said I never really noticed you, but now I see that you were gone, and it just goes to show just how wrong you can be when you said I had no feelings, and then nothing could hurt me. But you went and did it this time. You bit off more than you can chew. You can't tell me that I'm selfish when all I'm thinking about is you. I never called when I was out late, just to say that I'm okay. So I forgot about those little things. What's a man like me to say? Remember what I told you when we had our last big fight, how I swore that you would leave me. God, I hate when I'm right, and it just goes to show just how wrong you can be when you said I had no feelings, and then nothing could hurt me. 'Cause you went and did it this time. You bit off more than you can chew. You can't tell me that I'm selfish when all I'm thinking about is you. Just how wrong you can be when you said I had no feelings, and then nothing could hurt me. 'Cause you went and did it this time. You bit off more than you can chew. You can't tell me that I'm selfish
fronting in the elevator. I see you see me, vodka and chaser. I already know I'm taking you home. You already know, throwing you a bone. Get it? Got it. Get it? Got it. Get it? Got it. Get it? You know I got it. Get it? I got it. You want it. I flaunt it. I got it. You get it. I want it. I got it. You know the deal. I am the meal, and I say what you doing, where you going, what you up to. I just want to do whatever you do. Get it? Got it. Get it? Got it. Get it? Got it. Get it? I got it. Tell me all the places you have been. I'll tell you how it feels on my skin. Ooh, get in my room. Ooh, I just want you. I'll tell ya, there's something else I want other than you in my room. There's something else that I would rather do. Ooh, I work all day and just want a release. I'm sure you do too more than you want to be. Please. Get it. I got it. You want it. I flaunt it. I got it. You get it. I want it. I got it. Get it. I got it. You want it. I flaunt it. I got it. You get it. I want it. I got it. You know the deal. I am the meal, and I say what you doing, where you going, what you up to. I just wanna do whatever you do. Get it. I got it. You want it. I flaunt it. I got it. You get it. I want it. I got it. Get it. I got it. You want it. I flaunt it. I got it. You get it. I want it. I got it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Isaac Thomas, Managing Director, Native Earth Performing Arts. My pronouns are he, him.
Kway kway, everyone. My name is Keith Barker. I am the Artistic Director at Native Earth. My pronouns are he, him.
Welcome to the final day of Weesageechak Begins to Dance 33, the online version. I'm a South Asian immigrant who now calls Takaranto home. I'm still stubbornly a permanent resident.
Why, Isaac? Why are you still a permanent resident? You just have to swear allegiance to the Queen, who represents colonial powers that stole Indigenous land, trying to satisfy an insatiable lust for wealth and power with their inhumane treatment, suppression, and devastation of Indigenous peoples and cultures around the world, who own significant reparations for these acts of violence. What's the big deal?
I suppose that, because the same applies to former colonies like India, doesn't it? So citizenship oaths of allegiance to that same individual are deeply problematic, aren't they?
They are.
Anyway,
yeah.
Set that aside for a little while. Anyway, my ancestral connection with this country is tenuously confined to a paternal grandfather buried in Priestville, Saskatchewan.
It's a long story, weird and long.
For another time.
True.
For me, I grew up in India. I came to Canada 20 odd years ago. Native Earth was one of two companies that gave me a theatrical home in Toronto. So I would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Takaranto is home now to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We give them respect.
We give thanks to our ancestors, to the original caretakers of this land who cared for it so that generations may prosper after. As the pandemic has shown us, the world is fragile. Our communities are fragile, and it requires us to do our part to protect the vulnerable and to support our frontline workers. It is also a reminder to keep reaching out to those people who might be struggling at this time, because that is what community does. Just like our ancestors did for their communities, we must step up in these unprecedented times. This festival, I have to say, it's our last day. So this festival, I have to emphasize that this festival is not possible without our team. We have an incredible team that has done such great work, and we've heard a lot of praise, and all that praise needs to be directed first off to our festival producer, Sue Ballant, who has been with us the last couple of years and has gone above and beyond continuously for us. Also, Victoria Wang and Teresa Cutknife, who supported her as producers and have been absolutely fantastic. To our festival designer and head tech, who's manning the YouTube channel, Brian Clifford Batty, who again, you know, is learning tons of tech and doing stuff that we weren't ready for, and it's been a huge learning curve, but as you can tell by all the recordings, he's done a fantastic job. To our marketing coordinator, Abby Ho, who we just keep throwing stuff at her continuously, and she keeps putting stuff out there on social media. So thank you, Abby, for all of your hard work. And to Alex Franks, who is, you know, doing the closed captioning and is also like stepping up at a time when his job is become more complicated without us having guests in our theater. And then finally, to our administrative assistant, to Kristen Francis, who makes sure that everybody gets paid, because we've just moved, you don't know this all, but we moved to an online version. So Isaac and Kristen have worked like 3 times as hard as they would normally to try to figure out a whole new system on how to get people paid. And then finally, to our Animikiig creator director, Lindsay Lachance, who's on her own life journey, a new and exciting adventure, but has also helped set up Animikiig so that it's successful moving forward. And then a big shout out to our patron services representatives, who we miss very much. And if we were all in the theater right now, they would all be part of this, but unfortunately we can't be in a theater. So we want to do a big shout out to Clayton, to Jessica, to Sophia, to Chanika, to Alexis, Joelle, Elizabeth, and Caitlin.
We would not be able to bring you this festival without extensive government support. So we'd like to thank all the arts councils of Canada, Ontario, Toronto, and Australia. The Department of Canadian Heritage and Ontario Arts Council's Indigenous projects. Also, several foundations have supported us: Metcalf, Hal Jackman, the Kingfisher Foundations, Toronto Arts, and the Ontario Arts Foundations. All of these funders recognize the massive impact that COVID has had and will have on our industry. And so they move really swiftly to stabilize arts organizations in these precarious times. So thank you very much. I'd also like to particularly thank our many donors, both past and present, some new in 2021, and some of you have been with us since inception. Thank you.
So every year when we do Weesageechak, we always talk about feedback. Some years we've had little pieces of paper with pencils and people can give back feedback. Sometimes we've given an email address in the brochure or something that we hand them at the beginning of the night, and people can go back and send emails. So this year we tried to formalize it, and we had a dramaturg panel. So we brought in 3 senior artists who received all the scripts and have looked at all the pieces, and they're going to give feedback. And then we were looking at this dramaturgical circle and thought they were, you know, there's such extensive knowledge and they're such bright and brilliant artists themselves that it would be great to have a chat. And so that's what this is today. This is us recording, getting them together to have a talk about Indigenous arts, about theater, about writing, about creation and everything. The chat is about 40 minutes long. And we wish we could have been longer, and we could have gone on for much longer. And hopefully in the future, we can do that again. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow is Native Earth's deadline for the recommender grants through OAC, the creators, theater creators. And that's tomorrow, Monday, November 30th. Abby will post a link in the chat, but you can also see it on all our social media. We've been blasting it out. So please, if you have a piece of work that you're working on and you need some support for development, please look at our recommender grants.
That's it for now. Thank you so much for supporting this work. We hope you enjoy the chat.
Stay safe, be well, and take care.
We look forward to seeing you at the theater again when that is possible. Until then,
Chimegwech.
ciao.
Ane Bojo Kwe Kwe, Keith Barkin, Indigenous Cause. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Weesageechak 33. Today, you're watching this. It's the end of the festival, but we're actually recording this on November 15th. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the traditional territories that Native Earth resides on, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are on Treaty 13 territory, which was the Toronto Purchase of 1787. And we're having a panel. Now, I want to kind of just talk about how this came to be. Every year we experiment with feedback from the artists involved in the festival, and it's like culminated in several different iterations. This year, since artists are not able to go into a lobby and have exchanges with other people that have either seen the show or get feedback from the actual audience during the performance, we decided to try something new. We invited 3 senior artists to form what we're calling a Dramaturg Circle. We are incredibly grateful to have Ken Williams, Jacob Boehme, and former artistic director Yvette Nolan as part of our circle. Their job during the festival is to read the work and to view the work that's going to be offered and then give feedback to anyone who is open to it. Now, since we have these 3 brilliant theater makers in our midst, we also just thought it might be nice to open up a conversation and to talk about the work and about their experiences and perspectives. I always prefer when people get to introduce themselves. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests, or let them introduce themselves, starting with Yvette.
Ani, Yvette Nadujnikas, Kitaganzi Binondanjaba. My name is Yvette. My people are from Kitaganzi Algonquin First Nation in Quebec, although I actually live in Treaty 6 in Saskatoon, which is Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Cree territory and homeland of the Métis. But I'm today recording this in Victoria because I'm out here directing, and that's the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. Yeah, and I'm so glad that we're able to do this. Miigwech.
Me too, me too. Next, Ken Williams.
Hi, everyone. Kenneth T. Williams. I only do that for the official kind of pronunciations of my professional name. Allows me more poster space. Also, I am originally, my people are from the Treaty 4 territory, from the George Gordon First Nation. Currently living, though, in Edmonton, which was originally known as Misquachi Waskaigan, in the Treaty 6 area, where I am a professor of drama.
Sweet. And lastly, Mr. Jacob Boehme.
Ninamani, everyone. Ngamai Jacob Boehme. I'm a Narunga and Ghana man from South Australia, but I'm zooming in this morning. It's morning here in Melbourne, Australia. Wurundjeri country, part of the Kulin Nations.
Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Keith Barker. I'm the artistic director at Native Earth Performing Arts. I am Algonquin Métis. My ancestors come from Mattawa and Golden Lake Reserve area, but I was raised in Treaty 3 territory. So welcome to this conversation. Well, what to start off with? Well, we had a lot of thought about how best to start, and I thought maybe first, maybe talk a little bit about yourselves. Maybe just introduce yourselves to the group. Does anyone want to start? Oh, so kind. Okay, Ken, why don't you start off?
Oh, great. I know we only have so much time with Yvette. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I am primarily a playwright in theater. That's my most of my practice. So I'm now also, I could consider myself somewhat of an experienced dramaturg as well. I have dabbled in acting, mostly to improve my writing, not to improve anybody else's performance. And so that's who I am. I've written, I keep losing count, but several plays, many of which have toured across Canada. And most recently, I've actually hit Europe with a version of Cafe Daughter that was produced out of Edmonton. So it's, that's my work. That's the majority of my work. I am a writer. That's where my dramaturgy tends to come from working with text. So if that's how I approach my dramaturgy, I'm always open about it. So if you want me to help you with text work, that's where my strengths are for the most part. So, but I like to believe I'm a very actor-centric writer. I like to write very strong characters for actors, and I love working with actors when I work with my own text.
Ken, you also had a show that was meant to be, that was due to COVID. Like, maybe talk about what the show that you had a new play coming up.
New play coming up that was going to be co-presented by, well, it was produced by Tarragon Theatre in Toronto, and then it was going to be presented also at the National Arts Centre, as well as Persephone Theatre in Saskatoon this year. It was called The Herd. It was originally conceived as an Indigenous adaptation of An Enemy of the People. And I just took that idea and ran with it essentially. And The Herd is about a veterinarian on her own reserve who is responsible for taking care of their bison herd, and in the process of purifying those bison to make them more, as she says it, more like her ancestors when they met their ancestors. 2 white bison calves are born, and it causes and it unleashes an enormous amount of let's just say a very strong reaction, both culturally, economically, as well as scientifically, as to what to do now that these bison have come back.
Great. I've read it. It's really, really great. I'm really excited when we'll be able to see it.
Finally get to see it, yes.
Yeah. Jacob.
Yeah. Well, I came through to writing through dance, really. I started out as an actor. I mean, I'd always written as a child, but I started out as an actor. It was through working with elders here in Melbourne that I ended up formally training in dance, which is at NAISDA, which is the Australia's longest running Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander dance training institution. And it was there that I kind of learned Indigenous dramaturgies and performance making methodologies, because we had to work alongside songmen and songwomen. And it was through working alongside those keepers of knowledge and story that the whole idea of storytelling, through embodied storytelling, was what I learned there. It was through coming out of dance, I ended up into puppetry, and it was through puppetry that I started to create scripts. And then I went back into formal training and completed a master's in writing back at the Victorian College of the Arts. And it's probably all of that, visual theatre, movement theatre, and working with elders and law keepers, that's the kind of the dramaturgical process that I apply to my practice and to other practice as well.
That's great. And you had work. You're currently working on something.
Yeah. I'm working on a couple of things. One of them is the second installation of a body of work around blood. So the first work that I toured it through Canada, Native Earth, were hosted Blood on the Dance Floor when it came through Toronto. And yeah, these works are kind of focusing on blood. The first work around blood was my own autobiographical story. And that was all around disclosure and looking for love, the need to be loved. The second one, probably more around forgiveness, really. Themes around forgiveness and identity, lateral violence, technology, social media, and the good, the bad, the ugly of social media, and how that's, how that it's opened up a lot of ways in which we can explore identity, but also a lot of ways in which we are becoming the authoritarians of identity.
Great. And Yvette.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk.
Yeah. So I'm a playwright. I realized that I wrote my first play 30 years ago, which just boggles the mind, and then became a director because I needed someone to direct my plays, and then became a dramaturge because we needed Indigenous dramaturges. It feels like I found my way to an Indigenous practice the long way around, because I wasn't trained in school. I was a theater rat, and I just wanted to be in the theater. And so I learned to do things by doing things. And then my years at Native Earth, I was at Native Earth for 8 years as the artistic director, and a little bit before there as a playwright coming to Weesageechak and stuff, and a little bit after there as someone still like disengaging from Native Earth. But that period of time really allowed me to forge an Indigenous dramaturgy, because I was working with like Turtle Gals, with Monique and Janny and Michelle St. John, and I was working by extension then with Spider Woman Theatre, the oldest Indigenous feminist theatre on Turtle Island. And so being in the room brought us all together, and everybody, that's sort of where I started to kind of figure out what it meant for me to be doing Indigenous theatre. I recently, I just had a play that is closing today online, so it'll be closed by the time people see this, that I had written for Prairie Theatre Exchange called Catharsis, which is about why we do theater. And it's a short 15-minute play for one actor in an empty theater. I've also been, as I've been hanging around this long, my practice has expanded to I've been doing opera quite a bit. And over the past few years, I've been working with Signal Theatre, which is a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary company. So we did dance opera, we did opera, we did like straight theater, we did installation, because a lot of what I've discovered in discovering Indigenous practices, we're always trying to reconnect everything. We're always trying to pull all the strands back together. And so I've also done quite a bit of danceturgy for the last, I don't know, 15 years, because again, we didn't have critical mass in terms of Indigenous practitioners. And therefore, I became a dramaturge because we needed more Indigenous eyes on Indigenous work. And then Indigenous dancers were doing Indigenous dance and dance theater. And so I started to learn to do that. So it's been an interesting journey to where I am now, where it just feels like I'm so open to doing almost anything as long as I can stay in the theater. And then, COVID.
Right. Well, actually, that's a good jumping off point, because we talk, I think much like you, as I started off as a theater rat and was just excited to do theater, and then moved into, like, when I started working at Native Earth, started to, being around people like Michelle St. John and Monique Mohican, Jenny Lozon and Craig Lozon, and all these artists like Wawate Fobister started to understand what is an Indigenous practice, what is an Indigenous framework in a rehearsal hall, like in creation. That I find lots of people ask me that question all the time, like, what is that? So I'd love to pose a question to each of you, is like, what is your ritual when you're in the room as a creator or as a dramaturg or as a director, as an artistic director? Is it like the same? Does it change? Is it like, how do you approach the work coming into those rooms? And, is it different when there's different people from different cultures and different perspectives coming into that room? Or is it always kind of like a set, like internal set of rules that you kind of walk into the room with? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I was thinking about it. Yeah, I was thinking about that question and when you sent it through, because I thought I actually don't have a formal ritual, which is making me think more now that maybe I should, because one of the things that I do around any work, and it's rather personal for me, is that I spend a lot of time gathering ancestors around me. And that's, I suppose, more around strength and permissions. So I usually I call on lineage. I call on thousand generations of storytellers to come and stand with me, to have my back, to stand in front of me, to stand beside me. And wherever I'm working, it's also about calling on the ancestors of that country. And it's a very personal experience. But now I'm thinking I need to perhaps formalize that in some way, whether it be through smudge or whether it be through smoking. I mean, one of the things that we've started here in Australia, we're seeing a lot more of it now, is that at the beginning of a rehearsal period or a coming together, that we will smoke. Maybe not daily, but we will make an event of everyone coming together for the first time. We will bring the eucalyptus with us, we will bring the wattle, and we will burn it, and we will use fire and smoke to signal that something is beginning. And I just wonder, because that personal gathering of the ancestors I usually do daily before I step into a rehearsal room. But yeah, you've made me wonder now whether I need to actually formalize that.
It is, for me, it is much the same, because for me, it is taking this structure, which is hierarchical, the theater room, which has been traditionally hierarchical, like the director and then everybody else below, and tipping it on its side. So it's like everybody brings everything to the room. So I bring my ancestors, I bring my values to the room, and it feels like in no matter who's in the room, whether it's an all Indigenous room or a mixed room, or in this case, there's like, I'm the Indigenous person in the room, I still bring that to the room. It's this thing we do at Native Earth, which is like those who came before us and those who come after, and we are in the middle of the continuum. So my feeling of responsibility to the ancestors, that I am here to do this work because of those who made it possible for me before, and because of those who are going to come after, means that I enter into the room and the work in a certain way, no matter what room it is. But I also have discovered that at this stage of the game, I have to be careful about what rooms I choose to go into, because not everybody is there, and I haven't got the time. I haven't got the time to be in bad spaces with people who refuse to tip the thing on its side. I don't have that time anymore. I'm like, I have only so much work left in me, and it has to matter, because it should always matter. This work that we do should always matter. And that's, for me, a thing that has informed my practice. It's like, I'm not interested in doing work that doesn't matter anymore for anyone's benefit, except for the people who are going to benefit from it, which kind of sounds convoluted, but that's how I feel in it.
Right. Ken?
Yeah, mine is, I find that, because that question did also make me go, well, how do I do this? And of course, I like to go into each process sort of
we're listening
to the possibilities that I'm about to experience.
You're delaying just
again?
Just say that again.
I'm back. Okay. Yeah, I like going into every room that whether I'm as a creator, as a playwright, going into a room, whether it be, and this is mostly the dramaturgical process, I like going into being open to the possibilities that are available there. And I have to be like kind of open and vulnerable and put myself in that space. I like being in case of dramaturgy, I like it when I'm surrounded by people who I believe know more than I do and have a lot more experience, and I go in with respect for that experience and respect for that the amount of time it takes for them to get there. Because I like to work with actors. I love working with actors, and I love working with directors. And when you're open like that, and Yvette and I had this experience when we were creating in Care with both not just the dramaturgical process, but the final rehearsal process. That was the most unusual rehearsal process for that play, because that play was very specific to a topic that impacted Indigenous people in Canada and does around the world, but specifically with the Child and Family Services. Every person in that room had that. And a lot of the time was not spent working the text and working movement and working the blocking. A lot of the time was actually us working it out, what this topic meant for us. And the rest of it just came because of that. Now, if we went in with like a structure, like we have 3.5 weeks, we got to do this, we got to be doing this, we got to have our tech day on this day and everything else, as the primary start, that play would not have been where it went. So for me, I feel I have to be open to what's going on. That's just sort of my own personal ritual. But going to, again, what Yvette just said, you also got to know when that's not working. When the people aren't you can tell when the people aren't going to be as equally giving or as equally vulnerable and willing to share at the same level. When things start being thrown up and protected, or people feel intimidated by the experience or abilities of others. There's a sense of this, it's a weird kind of jazz I kind of do. I got to sort of play off of everyone out. It hasn't been that much of an issue, but it has happened.
Yeah,
I've experienced those things. But when I go in as a dramaturg, when I go in as a leader, and I'm sort of trying to mentor specifically younger playwrights, and this is all playwrights. This is not just Indigenous playwrights. I try and help them. I found where someone challenged me, what was Indigenous about my practice? Someone said, what's Indigenous about that? And at first I was a little peeved by the question, but then I realized, okay, what is it? And I have now, my dramaturgy has moved. Again, I said I work with text, but my dramaturgy has moved to where I'm trying to get the playwright to really explore the world they're creating and take full advantage of that world and really fill that world up. So quite literally, they know where they're standing. Where are you standing? What place are you in? What is to use a really bad academic word, what is your positionality? But what is your relationship to the stage? What is your relationship to the audience? What is your relationship to the director? As a playwright, I feel that if you understand those things internally, you understand the world and you become richer for it. So you understand the world you're creating, and to focus on that. And that is, again, I don't know how to ritualize that, because I need to do that. I need to feed it off where that playwright is at and how they're listening.
Right. Well, actually, I think that actually jumps to the question, a different question we had, because I think part of that idea of like formalizing what is Indigenous practice is because people are asking on such a consistent basis now about what that is. They want to know, they want in, or they bring you into that space to be that person, which can also be weird. So to me, I think it's more what is for you, because I was talking to Isaac about this, is I can remember when I was an artistic associate at Native Earth and no one cared what Native Earth was doing. And we would fight. We had allies that would open their doors to us, buddies and Passamarai. We knew who our allies were, and we also knew what organizations and companies were not going to work with us and would never put Indigenous people on their stages. We just knew. And I always remember you, Yvette, like fighting. There was always a fight. Whereas last week, we had like 4 people ask us like offer like partnerships, or people wanting to, like, we get this consistently now where it feels like things have shifted. So to me, I think because you're senior artist, because you were there before, like, what is the difference now for you than say, what was happening 10 years ago for you? And is that change good for you? Is it like, how's that changing the way in which, like, even to hear you say that, like, I've only got so much time left. I mean, that's the first time I've heard you say that. He's like, I only have time for, that's what my mom says to me is that idea of like, I'm at an age right now where I don't have time for bad people anymore. Like I'll just stop, connecting with those people because I just don't have the time anymore for that. And I feel like that with the art, as opposed to 10 years ago when we were like knocking on all the doors and trying to get people to be interested in our artists and our work. Does that, like, for you three, what do you see as that difference from 10 years ago to now? Because it's been a big shift in a very short amount of time. Yvette, do you want to try that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it's like flavor of the week, except bigger, right? Because of the neo-civil rights movement, because of Black Lives Matter, because of COVID and us having to stop and listen to each other, all of these things have created this kind of perfect storm where, the equity, diversity, inclusion, articulation, the rhetoric has suddenly come to the fore. And so now people are aware that they've been excluding, and so they're looking for ways to partner. And thank God we've been working this long at what we're doing without being let in, so that there are artists who've been working all this time, so that there is work that has been happening all of this time, so that we can actually move from one kind of work, because the gaze is shifting, right? Like there was a time when white folks would let us in, but only if we performed in a certain way. And I'm not naming any names, but we all know who I'm talking about, right? Like a certain kind of, so we could be a funny Indian, we could be a drunk Indian, it could be a pain story, pain porn. That was kind of it. And then people could be like, oh, they're so brave, or they're so like whatever. And that was the only narrative that was allowed. But now with this explosion of like consciousness, like everybody learning, there feels to me like this is the opportunity for more complex, more sophisticated, more developed stories that are not just those sort of 3 tropes. And good that we've been working all of this time getting ready for it, because otherwise we're still going to be dealing with like brown icing. We're still going to be dealing with tokenism. We're still going to be dealing with, it's that thing of like,
Reminiscing.
you get the opportunity because of indigeneity, but you actually have to, like, here's the opportunity to actually be really good at it and and earn the place there, so that it's a surprise to, like, it will be a surprise because nobody's looked at us for, that's my entire life in theater, like nobody looking.
Ken?
My opinion of this has evolved, like, naturally. Hopefully, your people's opinion evolved. But I remember back a few years ago when I was trying to get specifically members of my band, which was quite a distance away from Saskatoon, to come see some of my plays at the Persephone Theater. Right, come to Persephone, and they're all going, "Well, can you bring the production to us?" And I was like, I felt this kind of like. I have to say, I felt this kind of cultural arrogance towards my own community. I said, no, you're welcome in this building. I'm trying to get you into this building, so you come into this building, and that has now completely flipped. Right? I find buildings don't work for the type of theater. Going back, that we're trying to create. Going back to my opinion about what is the world you're creating, and who. And the second question to that, for me. Is who are we serving as artists? Western artist mentality is the artist is put on a pedestal, and the artist can create whatever you want, and then people judge the artist and their art by attending or not attending. But the artist can, in the Western way of thinking, there's given this sort of ultimate freedom to say anything, and that's like highly protected. Whereas I'm feeling that we sort of intrinsically, as Indigenous artists, know that we cannot just say anything. We have responsibility. We don't have right. We have responsibility. We have responsibilities. Sometimes that responsibility is we do have to tell a tough story, but our responsibility is that story has to serve us first, our people first, not someone else. It's not there for someone else to just peekaboo at and just have a look behind, like almost like we're in a zoo exhibit. Oh my God, spend 15 minutes, look at that, isn't that great? And then they walk off, have their popcorn or whatever. It's like we're still there. We're not the exhibit. We're still there. So in terms of what I've become to define what I could consider Indigenous art, I think there's, like, for me, 3 levels, and this is kind of, again, another evolving thing. But 1, it has to come from an Indigenous creator. 2, there has to be Indigenous team work. The person they surround themselves with to create that work has to be Indigenous. And then the final thing for me, and just as most importantly, is it has to serve an Indigenous audience first. Like planting an Indigenous person in the middle of that, trying to call it Indigenous something, isn't the way to do it. That doesn't work. We can advise, we can help, whatever, but it doesn't make it Indigenous work. I think there's multiple levels and relationships that we have to establish in order to be Indigenous. And I don't think those relationships are possible, going to the hierarchy that Yvette was talking about, in conventional theater spaces.
Yeah.
Not without like bashing a door down or moving a wall or something, but it has to be done. We have to figure out where our space is. And if it doesn't fit in the building, we don't go in the building. We don't go in the building.
And I just wanted to say, Ken, I feel like you've evolved. Your work has also kind of reflected that. The in care for me is like so much Indigenous work is actually for the world, right? It's for a white audience or for Canadians to understand. That's our audience. Whereas in care to me was actually a story. You're asking hard questions laterally to us as an Indigenous audience. And that to me was like, it blew my mind away. I got to read it. I got to play the very complicated character in your piece. And to me, like, that was the exciting part, where these questions weren't being posed to like a mainstream audience. These were actually being posed to an Indigenous audience, which was really exciting. And a mainstream audience would still go along for the ride and completely get an education around some things. But also, to me, it like spoke to who you were actually writing for, which was exciting. Yeah.
Thanks.
Jacob.
Yeah, I agree with everything pretty much that Yvette and Ken have both said. I think for a long time, I've also been questioning everything that Ken was talking about, particularly about what the work's relationship to community is. because we've had great strides in terms of mainstream work. There used to be an Indigenous work on a mainstream stage every other year. It generally followed the rules of creating trauma porn. So it was educational, and only recently, over the last couple of years, are we seeing the double trouble. So we're having the Indigenous director and the Indigenous writer. That changes things a little bit. What we haven't really we haven't mastered, and we're slowly getting there, is the triple threat: add the Indigenous dramaturg, because then that's when we're going to see changes in the theatre that we work, the theatre that we create. The kind of work that is being made for main stage, it's still, while it's not trauma porn, it's still kind of in the arena of identity. It's all kind of in the arena of identity work, mainly because we're working with, I think, non-Indigenous dramaturgs, and because we're working for and making work for a non-Indigenous audience, because we're putting it in the buildings that we were not allowed in, and that's within living memory. You know, my father and his siblings, you know, weren't allowed in some of these buildings not that long ago. And now we're asking our community to come into them and spend really sometimes a lot of money to come and see work. And this is where I think the questions, you know, the big dramaturgical questions about, well, what relationship does this work have to the community? Who is it serving specifically? How is it benefiting us? How is it benefiting those people in the audience? I mean, the questions around, you know, who is it for in particular demographics, for black fellas in the audience? And then more broadly, the community. Because if you're going to make trauma porn, if we're going to still rehash these colonial narratives and, you know, all the kind of trauma porn that we do, it's like, if you're in a community where you're living that daily, why would you spend $60 to $100 per ticket to come and see it? It doesn't make sense. And these are the questions that we have to ask of ourselves and our emerging artists. We're seeing a lot of change in terms of the kinds of work that's coming, and it's generally in the small to mediums and the independent sector. There seems to be a lot more freedom there. We're still not seeing the triple threat yet, which I'd love to see more of. The Indigenous dramaturg, writer, director, and then add on the lighting and design and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more in terms of what I would kind of describe a move into more Indigenous process, Indigenous dramaturgy, methodologies. I'm seeing a lot more of that and a lot more growth of that in dance theatre. There seems to be more of a relationship to Indigenous values, principles, ceremonial, like a lot more kind of influence coming from ceremonial, you know, the methodologies and the dramaturgies we would find in ceremony are happening more in dance theatre, because dance has kind of exploded here over the last decade and a half in terms of what you can do that's not Bangarra. You know, so there's a lot more scope and a lot more scope and independence there.
Can you for those who don't know, can you explain what Bangarra is?
Oh, Bangarra is wonderful. I mean, you know, all props to them. Bangarra was the first kind of big Aboriginal contemporary dance company that was born out of NAISDA. And that was back in the 80s. It's become one of our major performing arts companies. It's one of the 28. And it's a multi-million-dollar a year funded company. It has toured the world, you know, decade after decade. It has a company of dancers that are employed, you know, to work. It's created great work, but with that success and with its, because it's extremely accessible to not only white audiences here in Australia, but also audiences around the world. It's extremely accessible. But what that has done for the independent dance sector is that it has created it's a double-edged sword, because while it's opened doors for independent choreographers. As soon as an independent choreographer or a work goes up, they're like, oh, that's not Bangarra. So how's that Aboriginal?
Mm.
Yeah.
It kind of
it's
sets the
one,
bar.
yeah, the one and onlyism, right? Like we have, there's our Indigenous dance company. That's all we need, as if there's not room for more, right? And more ways of telling stories. Yeah.
I was sitting in the theatre, this is years ago, watching one of our senior artists, Vicky Van Hoot, who's an absolute scream. Like, her work is wild. Like, her dance theatre work is brilliant. And it was actually watching a show called Brilliant. And the lights came up and there were 3 people sitting behind me, and the woman said to the man, was that Aboriginal, was that? Was that Aboriginal dance? And he responded, yeah, look, nothing like Bangarra. But this is, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's that sense of homogenous, right? Like, you know, especially, I mean, Canada being, you know, Australia, we don't realize how big Australia is in terms of different communities, and, you know, it's so eclectic. And the idea of like, well, this is the one, like you said, Yvette, oneism. You were saying, Jacob, about this idea that you're seeing change in the work. Like, maybe are you seeing, well, like in the artists that you're interacting with and people that you're in rooms with, for the 3 of you, like, where do you think people are drawing inspiration from, or where do you see the work going that's changing right now? That's exciting.
Ooh. Like, there's a lot of different things going on I mean, it's still in some ways playing with themes of identity and all of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of really interesting work that's being done, like my cousin Carl Telfer over in South Australia is starting to work a lot with technology and creating these, working with illumination, story song, illumination and all kinds of stuff. They made one work which was at the Fringe, the South Australian Fringe, called Yabbara. And it was one of those immersive experiences where you had to walk in, and it was, you know, it was a kind of cavern that you walked through. There's a lot of people like Delvine Cockatoo Collins is starting to work with AR, augmented realities. Virtual realities are starting to become a big thing here. And it's kind of artists in community working with communities to then take expressions of culture into technology. That's the kind of, there's a big movement going on down here. It's not necessarily about taking them into the theatre per se, but they're creating all these other spaces where people can gather. It's really interesting. The work that is happening in the 4 walls and in the traditional kind of European houses of culture, there's a plethora of different kind of content that's coming up. A lot of it, though, if you really, in nuts and bolts, if you boil down to it, is still identity theatre.
Yeah. Ken? Go ahead, Yvette.
I was just going to say, I think for me, what's exciting and different is an idea of Indigenous worldview holding work. So that, like, an assumption of Indigenous worldview and how things are connected. And then that's not necessarily, that is sort of the base note, but it's not necessarily the subject. So the subject could be about climate change or like other bigger picture stories, but knowing that, like, everything starts from Indigenous worldview and how everything is connected. That's one thing. And then, like, for instance, I'm working on Wardo, like on Jimmy Blais' play in Weesageechak, and he's grappling with, it's a play, but it's about how these Indigenous people grapple with Shakespeare, like, and what it means to love Shakespeare when you're Indigenous. And so language, and it becomes about language, and it's looking at colonization, but through art and through language, and the power of, you know, art that it exists and has existed and has been used to colonize. And it's a clever and inspiring play that is not about, and, you know, it deals with all kinds of other things because everything is connected. So for me, that's the thing, everything is connected, showing up in a lot of work, and just an assumption that like everything is connected and not having to show that. And then the work happens inside of that worldview.
Yeah, I should respond to that. In terms of saying identity theatre, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. In some way, any kind of theatre piece is about identities, either as communities, as a society, historically or presently. Yeah, I still, there's one artist who I'd refer to, Maria Randall, who's a senior dance artist here. And she said something that has stuck with me for years in response to the question, and it's normally white fellas that have started asking this question of us about why do you always make work about your culture and about identity, that we seem to have adopted and continue to ask each other. And Maria's response to that was, well, if you come from a community where your dances were banned, where your language was taken from you, where your tribes were hunted down and massacred, if you came from a community where the ability to practice your culture was stripped of you, what the hell would you be making work about?
Yeah, that's, and just following on that perfectly, is that like the exciting new work I'm seeing is because of the dislocation of relationship, people, young people trying to find who their relations are. How are they connected to anybody? Who are they connected to? What are they connected to? What land are they connected to? And what's different and why it's exciting is that they're really quite bold about asking the question and asserting the question. Whereas from my generation, myself, when I was younger, I was like, I knew who I was, and that was one point, right? There was just this one thread of who I am, right? But then I didn't realize until I was a lot older how fortunate I was to have that connection. I had very strong connections to my family. That was, as from childhood on, and to see, and so to see this new kind of like this struggle, like this, generation or one generation next that are like going, well, who are we anymore? Do we even still have a place? And they're going, well, we're going to ask the question. I'm going to ask the question up front, right? And, and in a sense, demand an answer, or I'm going to posit something. I'm going to make a statement, and then, we're going to move from there. And I think that's, a community always has to, I think, constantly question itself. And see, where are we in this place? Because if we don't keep doing that, we're just going to say we're going to assert one thing. That one thing may not be all the answers, may not be all the connections, right? And I think that's very strong. And I'm seeing that a lot from a lot of young writers and performers. And it's the way that question is now being asked is different, and it's a lot more exciting.
Don't know what it's like for you fellas over there, but over here, we've, in the last, I reckon 5 years, we've seen an explosion of queer Indigenous work. Is that happening over there as well? Either queer Indigenous or this whole discussion around intersectionality. So it's the Indigenous and.
Well,
over there?
In Canada, actually, Indigenous theatre came from queer Indigenous creators.
Yeah.
Like Thompson Highway,
Renee Highway, Billy
Spider Women.
All our leaders were.
They're the foundation. Yeah, they're the foundation of our theater of our theater existence.
Yeah.
Daniel David Moses. Yeah, it's like rest in power, Daniel. Like this is where it came from. This is where it all started. So for us, we've had that. That's not been a question, I think, that we've struggled with.
See, that's interesting, because over here, I think we've still got a hangover from the missionary days.
I'm not saying that's not there anymore, but
no.
Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. We still, I think in our politics, Indigenous politics, our political bodies are struggling with that.
Yeah.
But the Indigenous theater has not.
That's awesome.
Yeah, in terms of like, because we're seeing lots in the news, right? Like we're all at home, and do you really? I posed the question because you had said this earlier, Yvette, around Black Lives Matter kind of it kind of, the lens turned because Black Lives Matter, a lot of those things were being echoed in the news of Indigenous lives, and safety checks by police and someone ends up dead. A young man, and this part of Jimmy's play is this idea as a young man is killed on a farm, and the person who killed him is not there's no justice, not held responsible. In terms of those kind of echoes, because we're seeing a lot more of that right now. Do you feel like that's affected the work, or is affecting the artists, or maybe not, or because it's also overwhelming? Because I said to someone recently, I find there's a lot of work that's people have been asked for so long to teach, like go into spaces and can you tell us about this? That work ends up being about teaching and not just about telling a good story. And so that's one of the effects I'm seeing of these, like being put in certain positions, being welcomed into spaces that are non-Indigenous, or where you are, like you said, Yvette, you're the only person. Do you feel like this stuff, like truth and reconciliation, all these things, like and the exhaustion of it by the mainstream, and they're being very vocal about that? Do you feel like that's actually impacting the art, or do you feel like it's living alongside, and that the artists are still just fighting for their space?
I think we're going to see, this is kind of a sideways answer for me.
Sure.
I think we're going to see a lot of bad art in the next little while because of the slingshot effect. Like all of the theaters are like commissioning like Indigenous playwrights or whatever, and Black playwrights, like othered, right, BIPOC people, to make work because they've been so absent from their stages. But I don't know that they're being careful or mindful, like it is the brown icing problem, right? So I think the fear of the white population, because they've been because now they're woke, right, is that there can be no dramaturgy on them because we didn't have them in, so now we have to have them in. And so there may not be the same kind of critical thought about the work that it deserves. So there could be a little, like every theater in the country, and we all know it takes long to make a piece, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to spit out a piece by the time the theater's open in a year or whatever it's going to be, 2 years. And it's like, and how good can those pieces be, and what are they going to be about? Like it's a bit reactionary, I think. I would be happy if the people who'd been working all the way along and developing a craft were those people, but those aren't necessarily the people who are getting those commissions.
Yeah. And I think we've all been in that position where we've watched a play that's been a result of something like that. And I can look around and say, no one's going to tell this person that this play is not very good. Like I've been in that position. It was like everyone's going to smile and say, yeah, it's great. And then go home and talk the honesty, which I think is a disservice to the artist.
Oh, completely.
The other issue too. Oh, sorry, John. Jacob. If I may just sorry. Zoom etiquettes.
Love Zoom.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Ken.
I was going to say that on top of that is that we're going to see, going to, like, again, this larger issue of identity, is there are people claiming identity, rightfully or wrongly, and then suddenly they're punted in as the person who is the theater artist du jour for, and I hate to say this, for the sake of funding in a lot of cases. They're like the theaters are responding to the financial pressures of the funding agencies to, so if someone makes a claim to an identity and then they suddenly get, access to resources, right? And they may have a legitimate claim to identity, but then it's like, but are you carrying the responsibilities with that? And that to me is a question that they're afraid to ask. They can't ask that question themselves because they can't be seen as asking that question. Whereas we can be seen as challenging it, but then we don't want to be seen as crushing someone at the same time. So we're in this weird kind of mix where, again, we're going to get specific kind of art based on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was going to say to, I think, Yvette's earlier comment was, like, we've had an explosion of the Black critic here. And in one hand, it's been really good because we've got Indigenous critics writing for, you know, major editorials. But a lot of the time, the critique is generally puff pieces. I think we've got a lot of lateral violence, as we know, in our communities. So then if you're going to critique something as a black fella, you know, critiquing black fella work, or Indigenous critic critiquing Indigenous work, you can't, I don't think there's much bravery at the moment, especially because we're tiptoeing through what this actually means, being critics of each other's work. Even within our own circles, we're not being as honest or as open or as authentic as we possibly could. But then I also think it comes back to, as well, there are questions around, I always keep coming up with, because all of a sudden the doors are starting to fling open, and it is reactionary, and it does smell of desperation, because here in Australia we now have funding criteria by state and federal funding bodies for organisations and venues that they must kind of tick a certain percentage of the other. And so there's a lot of stuff that's happening where doors are opening, but then it's also that question of, you know, that, what is it? Who was it? One of the Marx brothers or something said something, I wouldn't want to be part of a club that would have me as a member. It kind of feels a little bit like that. Like, why are you opening the door now?
Yeah.
You know, you've kept it shut for 40, 50 years. Why now?
Yep.
There's a lot of talk down here as well about, and it's not a one or the other, but there's a lot of talk here about turning our backs on the institutions. We've played very well. We've done very well at making white fella theatre for mostly white audiences, of Indigenous stories. But it comes back to the questions that Kenneth raised at the start of our yarn about who are we making it for, why are we making it, who's this benefiting, and what's the long haul here?
Yeah.
What's the long haul here? Because, you know, we've all pretty much experienced in the last year systems that have completely crumbled. We've watched them completely crumble financially, you know, morally. And it's kind of like, while everybody's talking about the pivot, I just wonder for us as Indigenous makers, you know, globally, what that pivot might actually look like. I haven't really been in big conversations just with black fellas, a global circle of black fellas, of Indigenous creatives, to go, well, what does a pivot look like for us? If we were to turn away from some of these systems that we've had to become complicit in just to survive, what happens if we just go, no, you're right, we got it. We'll just go back to the longhouse, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's, wow.
The lights just went out here.
Oh, okay.
Wow, amazing.
I think that's a great way to kind of leave us. I think that's a great question, Jacob, in terms of like, what does the future look like? When, you know, for so long we've been told that the things can't change and this is the way it's got to be. And we're watching those things that have been told to us actually really change, like massive social change right now. So I think it's great to leave people with that. I do want to say just one, we're going to say goodbye just quickly, but I know that there are lots of young artists out there that are going to be watching this. And I just wanted, if you had anything you just wanted to say to them at this time, you know, lots of them aren't able to work. Lots of them are new to the industry. And some of them are in theater school and struggling, you know, for their own identities and their own like spaces. Is there anything that you'd just like to say to them that we can leave off with?
Be stubborn.
Yeah, make use of the time. Like there, you know, this has happened to all of us for a reason, and it's a good time to be looking inside and looking back and looking forward and make good use of the time with your practice.
I think Yvette said it for me, looking back to look forward. At this point, the one thing I keep doing is looking back to people like, you know, Uncle Bob Mazza, Uncle Jack Charles, Annie Marshall Langton, all the mob that started our theatre and dance sectors, contemporary theatre and dance sectors, with nothing. There was no funding bodies that they could rely on. There was nothing, yet they created this swell of activity and movement and revolution. And what I would say to young artists is know your lineage, know the provenance of where you come from, because back there's some answers that I think are going to be extremely important to how we move forward as a contemporary Indigenous society.
Yeah.
Yes, Ken?
Be stubborn. As well as be stubborn. You don't know, like there is no way to understand. Like we didn't know COVID was coming. We had no way to deal with it, right? So you have to be able to adapt and just stay focused on what it is that you're dreaming of, and just keep one step at a time. Because my life story and how I got into theater and where I am at this point is not a straight line. And it definitely did not start out as a theater rat, when I was a kid. It started off because I like to write, and I didn't have enough pages to write a novel to get into a certain writing class.
Wow.
But I got into a playwriting class, and even then it's been all over the place. But this is where I am because I'm just a stubborn person. So it's like,
that's great.
Yeah.
Be stubborn.
Stay stubborn.
Well, thank you so much, Yvette, Jacob, Ken. Thank you for doing this. We're really excited to have you as part of the circle. And stay safe, be well, and thank you for this.
Thanks all. So nice
thank
to
you. This is great.
play with you. Talk to you soon.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.